Hello all, I'm Master Sergeant Carden from the 96th Weather Squadron, and today we'll be going over some of the effects of hurricane and what to expect during the upcoming hurricane season. Here you'll see the damaging effects of recent hurricanes that we've had. If you look on the left, 2005 Hurricane Katrina basically wiped out all of the Louisiana and Mississippi coast. Then over here you see more recently Hurricane Michael from 2018, which was devastating to all of Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico City Beach, Florida area. Another look at Hurricane Michael. Some of the destruction it did destroyed many buildings and everywhere that it hit basically. Then you look at the right, Hurricane Ivan. This is actually on Eglin Air Force Base in 2004. If you look and see, we have a little pointed house out there, basically completely covered in water. There was a huge storm surge with this one, which did a lot of damage to the actual base here at Eglin. We'll start with tropical activity definitions. We got tropical depression, tropical storm, hurricane, and major hurricane. As soon as a depression hits 35 miles or above, we start to classify it and we start to name it and track it throughout the coast and throughout the Atlantic. Main thing I want to point out here is the difference between a hurricane and a major hurricane. By definition, hurricane is Cat 1 or Cat 2. Major hurricane is Category 3, 4, or 5. However, realistically, there is no difference. Once you get to 75-mile-an-hour winds or higher, it's basically devastating anything at all that's in its path. So if you hear hurricane, whether you hear hurricane or major hurricane, a hurricane is a hurricane. Be prepared. Get ready. Move into the HURCON conditions. The base commander, once the hurricane or a storm is 96 hours out from hitting Eglin and impacting us with at least 35-mile-an-hour winds, the base commander will institute the HURCONs. HURCONs are all based on timing. Do not confuse the HURCON timing with the hurricane category strengths. So we start at HURCON 5 once it's 96 hours out. 4 is 72. 3 is 48 hours out. 2 is 24. 1 is 12. 1C is it's occurring, so 35 to 49 knot winds are occurring on base, and we are actually feeling the effects of that. And then afterwards, once this storm passes, we'll go into 1R, which is the recovery phase, which will differ depending on the damage and the intensity of the storm. Here we look at the hurricane categories. Remember, I said to focus on the fact that hurricane categories are all about strength and HURCONs are all about timing. Do not confuse the two. Well, see again, we go from depression to storm to category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with the different classifications. Hurricanes, major hurricanes, I'll say it again, they're all the same. Get out if you need to, get out if you're allowed to, and always be prepared for them. This is Atlantic Hurricane Climatology. So our season lasts from 1 June to 30 November. We have had storms in May and December, sometime during an extended season, but the majority of our action is going to be end of August, September, and then into early October. That's where the most activity and our larger storms are going to be hitting the area. Here you look at the tracks month by month. Like I said previously, August, September, and October, everything really ramps up. Especially September, we get a lot of storms that come across Florida and especially into the Gulf. If you look at the numbers of the storms passing within 120 nautical miles of Eglin, September, of course, is the highest, and that's going to be our most prevalent time and the time that we're looking out the most. Hurricane threats. So there's a lot of things that go along with hurricanes. Storm surge, waves and rip currents, tornadoes, winds, and rainfall and flooding. So our biggest thing we focus on is storm surge. Storm surge historically kills the most people associated with hurricanes. That's actually what made Katrina so devastating, was it had almost a 30-foot storm surge. And what that means is imagine a literal 30-foot wave of water, 3-story houses just completely covered in water. That tends to kill a lot of people at the initial and do a lot of damage. Then you look at waves and rip currents. If you're in the water during a hurricane, I don't know what to tell you. Then we look at tornadoes. Tornadoes are normally focused along the outer bands of the storm as the storm gets closer and closer. Those are very sporadic, and it just depends on your location in reference to the storm. Then you look at rainfall and flooding. Of course, anywhere when there's a giant influx of rain, a whole bunch of rain coming from the hurricane, it's going to flood. And then right after storm surge, the second most damaging thing is winds. Hurricane Michael didn't have a lot of storm surge with it. It didn't have a whole lot of rain with it once it hit. It waited till it got inland and started dropping a lot of rain. What it had was winds. Wind just destroyed all of Tyndall and majority of that area over there. Literally not just ripping roofs off of houses, literally demolishing houses. Our weather sensor at Tyndall actually broke after it got 130 knot winds because they were blowing so hard. So just be prepared and be ready for all these things that are going to happen during the hurricane. So for the local area for Eglin, whenever a hurricane is forecast to hit, the Weather Squadron will put out a product similar to this that shows the storm surge probabilities. For Eglin, we do sit right on the bay, which is right next to the Gulf. So our southern end of our reservation is very susceptible to the storm surge and to the heavy flooding. Take a little more zoomed in look. Our biggest area of threat for storm surge on the base is actually base housing. The way it sits, the new base housing, the way it sits right next to the bay. That's where the biggest storm surge is going to come from and feel the most effects of that. And then, of course, along Postal Point and everywhere that's near the water. And depending on the size of the storm, it's not just the edge of the water. Like I said, when Katrina hit, it had such a huge storm surge that it was washing giant barges as far as 2 miles inland. So just be prepared for it. If you're told to get out, get out. Don't try to ride it out. Do what you can to safely get out and get to shelter. Here we'll take a look at the hurricane deaths and damage. And once again, we highlight Katrina because of the devastation that it actually did. You look at their deaths, the 1,500 plus, and like I said, majority of those were from that storm surge. But then you go into all the other damage as well. Basically, once again, don't play with hurricanes. If it's coming, get out. Here we look at the aftermath. This is just from Michael, the most recent one. It was a pretty big storm. Michael kind of caught everyone off guard because it was only a Category 2 or a regular hurricane, not a major hurricane, about 24 hours out. And then in that 24 hours, it rapidly intensified and actually made landfall as a Category 5. That's why I said recently, hurricane is a hurricane. Doesn't matter whether we label it major or not. They can intensify quickly in the warm waters of the Gulf, and you'll never know what's going to happen. This is the aftermath, some of the devastation of all the wind and all the houses that were just completely destroyed. As these hurricanes approach, we'll issue watches and warnings from the Weather Squadron. A watch means it's possible within the area. Warning means it's going to happen within the area. Please pay attention to these. We also have this cone of uncertainty, which I'm sure you've seen. Just because you're not in the cone does not mean you can't feel damage from this hurricane. The cone is only the track of the very center of the hurricane. And the fact that these things can be 1,000 miles wide mean if you're anywhere near the area, you can be affected. Decision-making process. We will give our forecast to the wing commander during the CAT. The wing commander will then make a determination and take action and declare hurricans. If you need resources from the Weather Squadron, we have our SharePoint as well as our IWID site that is a local site that we continually update. Basically, be prepared now. Know what you're going to do. Pay attention to the storm. It only takes one. It only takes one to devastate an area. Have any questions, contact the 96 Weather Squadron at 882-4800 or on our SharePoint.